Chapter 1. The Boy Who Never Lost. Ravi had always been the boy who figured it out. From kindergarten through high school, he wore victory like a second skin. Neat grades, sharp answers, a reputation so clean it gleamed. Teachers loved him. Parents compared their children to him. And Ravi, he believed them. Success wasn't just something he achieved. It was who he was. He had grown up in a modest apartment in a bustling Indian city, where the sound of traffic and ambition never slept. His father worked long hours as a railway clerk. His mother, soft-spoken but razor-sharp, drilled into him a single mantra: if you want to rise above, you must never fall. And so Ravi didn't. He aced every exam, won every debate, and strutted through school hallways with the quiet arrogance of someone who'd never been wrong. People called him gifted, and he believed that too. What no one saw, however, was the fear that lived behind those perfect scores. A tiny, coiled thought that whispered, what if I fail? What if I'm not who they think I am? But that voice was buried beneath applause, trophies, and the intoxicating rhythm of always being the best. Until college. Until the walls of a competitive university, where every student had been a Ravi in their hometown, started closing in. But for now, in this chapter, Ravi is still untouched. A golden boy walking a tightrope, not realizing it's suspended above something far deeper than failure. His first real encounter with who he truly is. Chapter 2. The Collapse. It wasn't just a bad grade, it was his first, ever. The paper lay in front of him, heavy despite its flimsy weight, bleeding red ink like an open wound. 42 per 100, circled twice. A mark that didn't just whisper, you failed, it screamed you are a failure. Ravi stared at it as if it belonged to someone else. Maybe they switched papers, maybe this was a joke, but the professor's signature was right there, his name typed cleanly at the top. No mistake. His fingers trembled, his throat tightened. Around him the classroom buzzed with nervous chatter. A few groaned at their own results, others laughed it off. But Ravi sat frozen, like his identity had been shattered in silence. It wasn't the exam, it wasn't the number. It was the story he told himself for years, that he was naturally smart, effortlessly capable, collapsing in one cold, fluorescent-lit moment. As he walked out of class, everything felt louder. The shuffle of shoes, the screech of chair legs, even the hum of lights above. Every sound mocked him. That night, he didn't talk to his roommates. He didn't open his textbook. He lay in bed, eyes wide open, reliving the same question over and over. If I'm not the smart one, who am I? He skipped meals. He turned off his phone. He couldn't bring himself to look at his parents' messages. This wasn't just about pride. It was about identity disintegration. He had never learned to lose, so now losing felt like death. A fixed mindset doesn't break slowly, it shatters all at once. And Ravi was standing in the wreckage of a self-image he thought would last forever. Chapter 3. The Silence. After the Storm. The days after the exam, it felt like Ravi was walking underwater. Muted, heavy, detached, classes blurred together. Professors' voices sounded like echoes in a tunnel. Even his closest friends began to sound foreign, their words too light, their laughter too free. He smiled when they looked at him, he nodded when they spoke. But inside, a quiet panic was building. Every time he opened his textbook, he felt an invisible wall rise. The sentences didn't make sense anymore. Logic he once found thrilling now looked like noise. And worst of all, he couldn't tell anyone, because people like Ravi didn't fall apart. They inspired, they led, they figured it out. So he suffered in secret. At night, he'd sit by the hostel window, staring at the streetlights below, the orange glow smudging against the darkness. He wondered what it would feel like to start over, but that felt impossible. He had built his whole identity on being unbreakable. Now he didn't even know how to begin. Then, one evening, something strange happened. He was sitting on a bench near the old economics building, slumped, staring blankly at the ground. The campus was nearly empty. The sky above was bruised with fading blue. That's when he saw him, a janitor in a faded gray uniform, mop in hand, quietly scrubbing the steps of the courtyard. Nothing extraordinary, just a man doing his job. But something was different. The way he moved, precise, unhurried, his posture calm, almost meditative. And then the strangest thing, he hummed, not loudly, just a soft tune under his breath, peaceful, like he was perfectly fine being invisible. Ravi watched him for minutes, mesmerized and oddly unsettled. How can someone move like that, like they're not trying to prove anything? He didn't know why, but the janitor's presence lingered in his mind even after he left. Not because he seemed important, but because, for the first time in days, Ravi had looked at someone without judging, comparing, or collapsing. He just noticed. And for a boy drowning in silence, noticing was the first flicker of awareness. Chapter 4: The Janitor Who Didn't Look Down. The next afternoon, Ravi sat on the same bench near the economics building. He told himself it was for the quiet, but deep down, he was waiting. The janitor returned at the same time, same pace, same uniform, same quiet tune. This time, Ravi didn't just glance. He watched. There was something disarming about the man. He didn't carry himself like a background character in Ravi's world. He wasn't rushed, wasn't ashamed. He cleaned with a kind of dignity Ravi couldn't place, like it wasn't less than anything, just different. After a few minutes, the janitor looked up and their eyes met. It should have been awkward, but the man just smiled. Not politely, but warmly, like he saw Ravi, really saw him. Ravi's instinct was to look away, but instead, to his own surprise, he spoke. "Hi." The janitor nodded. "Hello, young man." A pause. Ravi scrambled for something more, but all he managed was, "You, clean around here often?" The janitor chuckled, eyes crinkling. "Every day for the last 5 years. So yeah, I'd say I'm a regular." Ravi smiled awkwardly. "Right. Sorry, that was dumb." "No such thing as dumb," the janitor said, dipping his mop back into the bucket. "Only quiet brains trying to speak up." Ravi paused. That was strange, poetic even. He watched him work in silence for a bit. There was something about the way this man spoke, calm yet sharp, humble but not small. "You seem happy," Ravi blurted out before he could stop himself. The janitor stopped, not offended, just curious. "Happy?" Ravi flushed. "I mean, sorry, I just meant, like, most people hate cleaning, but you don't seem to." The janitor leaned on the mop handle, thinking. "I don't mind cleaning," he said finally. "It gives me time to think. You'd be surprised how much the mind clears when the floor does." That line hit Ravi harder than it should have. He gave a soft nod, unsure why his chest felt warm and tight at the same time. "I'm Ravi," he said. The janitor extended a hand. It was firm, worn, steady. "Nice to meet you, Ravi. I'm Aaron." And just like that, something shifted. Not a revelation, not a breakthrough, just a beginning. Chapter 5: A Question Without a Mark. Ravi didn't know why he kept going back. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was Aaron's calm, unshakable presence. Or maybe, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he didn't have to be anyone around him. There were no grades here, no expectations, no audience, just a janitor who never tried to impress, yet always left an impression. Day after day, Ravi sat nearby while Aaron worked. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. And slowly a rhythm formed, unspoken, gentle, familiar. Aaron would mop the floors, wipe the railings, clear the bins. Ravi would ask simple questions. "Isn't it boring? Don't you get tired? Do people even notice you?" And Aaron, always patient, always grounded, would answer without flinching. "Boredom isn't in the work, it's in the mind. Fatigue's just the body talking. You gotta learn when to listen and when to push. Most people don't notice you until you're gone, so show up for yourself first." These weren't lecture lines, they weren't meant to teach, but Ravi remembered them, and that disturbed him in a way that stirred something deep. Because here he was, top student, science stream, trained to dissect systems and explain everything. Yet this janitor, with no degree, no accolades, no audience, was saying things Ravi didn't know how to argue with, One afternoon, Ravi asked the question he'd been holding in his chest like a secret. Why are you okay? Aaron looked up from the trash can he was tying shut. Okay? Yeah, I mean, you mop floors, you sweep dirt, you're invisible, but you act like none of it bothers you. Why? There was no offense in Aaron's eyes, just quiet recognition, like he'd heard versions of that question many times before. He leaned on his broom, thinking, I wasn't always okay, Ravi. And that was it. No story, no elaboration, just a thread. A thread Ravi suddenly wanted to pull, but he held back. He wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, he sat there, staring at the sky through the old courtyard trees, wondering, could a person break and still feel whole again? Chapter 6. The Cost of Silence. It was strange, the way Aaron never rushed his answers. Ravi had come to expect the quiet, and in some twisted way, it was comforting. But today was different. Ravi hadn't been sleeping well. The weight of the failure still clung to him like an ill-fitting coat. The anxiety followed him into every room. Every conversation felt shallow. Every textbook a foreign language. And now, his self-doubt was bleeding into everything he touched. That afternoon, as the usual rhythm of their conversation continued, something inside Ravi snapped. Why do you keep saying that? He blurted out, frustration making his voice sharp. You keep saying things like, it's all in the mind, or you've got to listen to your body. But none of that means anything. I'm failing. I can't think my way out of this. Aaron didn't flinch. He simply stopped mopping. Ravi's chest tightened. He hadn't meant to snap, but it was too late. The words were out, and the room felt thick, suffocating. Aaron slowly set the mop aside and turned to face him. You're angry, Aaron said, but you're not angry at me. You're angry at yourself. Ravi's heart raced. Was he that obvious? What's your point? You're angry because you believe the world should work a certain way. That's because you've always been good at something. You're entitled to success. Arun's gaze was steady, as if he could see straight through Ravi's defenses. But you haven't learned the first lesson yet. Ravi frowned. And what lesson is that? Failure isn't the end, Ravi. It's the first step. The universe doesn't owe you success. It only owes you the chance to learn. The words hit harder than Ravi expected. For a moment, there was silence. But it wasn't the same kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was a quiet that carried weight, like something had been said that couldn't be unsaid. Ravi wanted to argue. He wanted to scream that it wasn't that simple. He wanted to tell Arn that it wasn't fair. He had studied harder than anyone. He had done everything right. But instead, something shifted. A sliver of clarity. Is that it? Ravi asked, a quiet desperation creeping into his voice. You think I'm just supposed to accept failure? Arun smiled softly. Acceptance isn't resignation, Ravi. It's understanding that failure is a part of the process, not a punishment. It wasn't the first time Aaron had given him a response that didn't make sense right away. But this hit differently. Ravi swallowed hard, the taste of something sharp and bitter rising in his throat. He didn't know how to explain it. He didn't know what to do with the thoughts swirling in his head. Aaron didn't push. He simply turned back to his mop, moving with that same steady rhythm. And Ravi? He sat there, watching, the words turning over and over in his mind, slowly pulling apart something inside him. Chapter 7. The Stillness Before the Shift. The next few days felt like a fog. Ravi couldn't focus in class. His textbooks, once his world, now seemed like a foreign language. He felt like a spectator in his own life, watching the world happen around him while remaining distant, untouchable. The same old sense of failure gnawed at him, but there was something else now, something that refused to be ignored. Arun's words echoed in his mind. Failure isn't the end. It's the first step. Ravi tried to push them away. It was too simple. It wasn't enough. It didn't answer why he had failed. It didn't explain why the world seemed to be spinning in every direction except his own. Still, something inside him began to shift, just the tiniest fraction. It wasn't that he was suddenly fine, or that he believed everything would magically get better, but there was a growing discomfort in the idea that failure was only something to be avoided, something to be ashamed of. Aaron had planted a seed, and now that seed was growing into questions Ravi couldn't silence. It was the end of another day when he saw Aaron again. Ravi wasn't sure why, but he found himself walking toward the courtyard. Aaron was there, as usual, sweeping the same steps, steady, methodical, present. Ravi paused, watching him for a long moment before walking up to him. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, taking in the rhythm of the janitor's work. "What's it like?" Ravi asked almost hesitantly. "To be at peace with failure?" Aaron didn't stop sweeping. He didn't even look up, but his voice was calm, deliberate. "Peace doesn't come from not failing," he said. "It comes from learning to accept failure. We all fail, and we all will again, but if you spend your life running from it, you'll never learn anything new." Ravi absorbed the words. The way they didn't feel like a lecture, but more like a gentle invitation. The silence stretched, and this time, Ravi didn't feel uncomfortable. Instead, it felt necessary, like the quiet had room for both of them. "You know," Arvind continued, "I once owned a business, a cafe. I worked every day to make it succeed. I poured my heart into it. But one day, it all collapsed. Customers stopped coming, I couldn't keep up, and it all fell apart." Ravi turned to look at him more closely. He had never asked for Aaron's story, but now it seemed like the right time to hear it. "I thought it was the end for me," Arun said, his gaze distant, as though he was remembering something far away. "But when I picked up the pieces, I realized something. You don't have to be perfect. You don't even have to succeed. You just have to keep moving forward. It doesn't matter if you fall. What matters is if you're willing to stand up again." Ravi didn't speak right away. The words settled into him, but in a way that he couldn't quite explain. They didn't fix everything, but they shifted something inside of him. He thought of the exam, the grades, the fear of never being enough. He had been so wrapped up in being perfect, he hadn't realized how much that had held him back. "Does it hurt?" Ravi asked quietly. "Starting over?" Arun's eyes met his then, full of quiet understanding. "Yes," he said simply, "but it's a different kind of pain. It's the pain of becoming who you were always meant to be." Ravi stood still, letting the weight of those words sink in. Chapter 8. The First Step Towards Change. Ravi didn't know what he was expecting, but it certainly wasn't the sense of clarity that washed over him the next time he sat down to study. It was a strange thing to feel like he was beginning again, to see his textbooks not as a source of dread, but as tools for something else, not for validation, not for grades, just for learning. But as soon as he opened his notes, the old anxiety came rushing back. What if I fail again? What if I'm not smart enough? What if I'm just not cut out for this? It was so easy to slip into that familiar spiral, to hear the voice in his head, louder than anything else, telling him he wasn't enough, telling him that failure was an indication of who he was, rather than something to overcome. But this time, Ravi hesitated. Arun's words echoed, steady and clear. "Failure isn't the end, it's the first step." Ravi closed his book for a moment and took a deep breath. He didn't have to solve everything at once. He didn't have to fix his entire life in one sitting, but he could start now. He picked up his pen and scribbled a note to himself. "It's okay to fail. It's okay to be uncomfortable. I can learn from this." For the first time, failure didn't seem like a weight around his neck. It felt like an opening, a chance to grow. Later that afternoon, he found himself at the courtyard again. This time, he didn't sit at the usual bench. Instead, he stood, waiting until Arun was finished sweeping the steps. When Arun finally paused, wiping his brow, Ravi hesitated. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, but something in him told him he had to speak. "Arun," he began, his voice low but steady. "I think I get it now. Not everything, but some things." Arun didn't answer right away. He just looked at Ravi, his face unreadable. Ravi continued, "I'm still scared. I still feel like I'm not enough, but I think I'm starting to see that maybe failure doesn't define me. Maybe it's part of the process, part of getting better." A small smile touched Arun's lips. "You're learning, Ravi, but remember, learning isn't about perfection. It's about being willing to show up again, even when you don't have all the answers." Ravi nodded, a strange warmth growing inside him. For the first time, he wasn't looking for a magical answer. He wasn't searching for an instant fix. He was just accepting the process, with all its mess, all its unpredictability, and that somehow felt like the most significant step of all. Chapter 9. The Second Fall. Ravi wasn't sure when it happened, but the moment he walked into the exam hall, the old feeling crept up on him. What if I fail again? He tried to quiet the voice. He'd been practicing, breathing through the fear, accepting that failure wasn't the end. But in the pit of his stomach, something stubborn twisted. The exam was harder than he expected. The questions were longer, more complex. His mind, which usually processed information quickly, now felt sluggish and overwhelmed. He fumbled through the problems, answering some with ease, but the others, the ones that mattered the most, felt out of his reach. The timer ticked down relentlessly. The pressure mounted, his palms grew sweaty, his heart raced, and before he knew it, the exam was over. Ravi walked out of the hall, the weight of failure sinking in like a stone in his chest. He wasn't sure how he had done it, but it didn't matter. Deep down, he already knew. This was it. He had failed again. It was a blow. No doubt. His anxiety flared. The old patterns returned, and he felt the familiar pull of despair. But then, something shifted. Instead of spiraling into the familiar pit of self-doubt, Ravi remembered something: the second fall. It wasn't the end. He thought back to the quiet conversation with Aaron, to the way the janitor had said, "Failure isn't the end. It's the first step." And suddenly, Ravi understood. He wasn't going to let this define him. He wasn't going to collapse under the weight of it. This time, he didn't run from his fear. He didn't retreat into his old, anxious shell. Instead, he let the failure sit with him, knowing that it didn't mean he was less. He was just learning. Ravi didn't immediately feel triumphant. There was no rush of excitement, no instant relief. But as the evening wore on, he began to feel something different: clarity. He sat down at his desk, opened his notes, and started reviewing. Slowly, carefully, without judgment. There were things he could have done better, areas he could improve. But this time, the focus wasn't on the failure itself. It was in the process of getting better. And for the first time, Ravi smiled. He wasn't afraid of failure anymore. In fact, he was beginning to choose it. Not for the sake of failing, but because each mistake, each misstep, was teaching him something. Something deeper than grades, deeper than validation. The real test wasn't in avoiding failure. It was in how he chose to grow from it. Final Chapter 10. The True Meaning of Growth. Weeks passed, and the shadow of failure still lingered, but it no longer had the same power over Ravi. He found himself in class one morning, staring at his notes, reflecting on the journey that had led him here. He thought of all the nights he had spent lying awake, consumed by the fear of not being enough, of how every mistake felt like a mark on his worth, how failure had always seemed like a final verdict. But then a new thought, a new understanding, began to take root in him. Ravi understood now that growth wasn't something you could rush. It wasn't about the perfect grade, the perfect answer, or the absence of failure. Growth was about the journey. It was about embracing the hard moments, the mistakes, the setbacks, and knowing that every one of them was a part of something bigger, a part of the person he was becoming. It had taken months, countless conversations with Aaron, and countless failures to realize that growth wasn't just a concept. It wasn't an idea. It was a way of living, of showing up day after day in spite of everything, of accepting that the only failure that could truly defeat him was the failure to try again. The next day, Ravi sat in front of his latest exam paper. He knew it wasn't perfect. He knew there would be mistakes. But instead of that familiar sense of dread, something else filled him: pride, curiosity, a willingness to learn. And when the results came back, Ravi wasn't shocked to see a lower grade than he'd hoped for. But instead of feeling defeated, he felt okay. Number. He felt more than okay. He felt empowered. This wasn't about the grade anymore. It was about what the grade represented, the steps he had taken, the lessons he had learned, and the strength he had discovered within himself to keep going. Ravi walked into the courtyard the next afternoon, his eyes clear, his steps more confident. Aaron was there, as usual, cleaning to the floors with quiet precision. "I didn't do as well as I wanted on the exam," Ravi said without preamble. But I think I get it now. Arun didn't look up, but his voice was warm. Get what? I get that it's not about failing or succeeding, Ravi said, a smile tugging at his lips. It's about learning, it's about growing, and that's the real victory. Arun nodded as if he'd known all along. You're starting to see it, Ravi. The world will keep throwing obstacles at you, but every time you fall, you have a choice, to let it break you or to let it build you. Ravi stood there for a moment, absorbing the words. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first met Arun. The fear of failure that had once paralyzed him had transformed into something powerful, a tool, a teacher, a reminder that the only way forward was through. Thank you, Ravi said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. Arun looked up then, his eyes twinkling with a quiet pride. You did the work, Ravi. You found the strength inside yourself. All I did was help you see it. And for the first time, Ravi knew that he would continue learning. He would continue growing. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but it would always be worth it.